This is The Dime, a 10-minute dive into the cannabis and hemp industry through trends, insights, predictions, and tangents.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to The Dime. This week we have a special guest, Hans Schulfer, and we're talking about growing cannabis. Hans, welcome to The Dime. Thanks for taking the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing real good. Hi, Kellan. Hi, Bryan. Good to talk to you guys again. It's been a while. Excited to do the show.
Awesome. So I think for our listeners, it might be best for you to kind of describe your role in the space, kind of what you're doing now, and kind of how you fell into this role and what got you started in the cannabis industry.
Sure. Well, like most people, I've been pseudo-involved for a long time, but we had a bunch of friends who were up in the Humboldt area who grew medical cannabis for a long time, and about 8 or 9 years ago, I joined them, ran a nursery and some smaller grows up there. And then right when Washington went legal, we moved up here and built a tier 3 greenhouse outdoor, greenhouse mixed light outdoor farm. And I operated that for 2 years. Then we expanded to a couple more outdoor farms. Long story short, got kicked out for political reasons. And now we operate the single largest outdoor grow in Washington. And we are expanding into an indoor space here and into a couple down in California.
Can you just quickly tell the difference or communicate the difference between cannabis from an indoor standpoint and outdoor standpoint, and kind of how an end customer can understand the variations in the flower? Can you just kind of describe lightly how the differences in where it's grown can really make a difference?
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, obviously the biggest factor with indoor is you control everything, right? So outdoors, you're essentially farming. But for example, 2 seasons ago, we got an early winter, and it was basically just a panic dumpster fire to get everything harvested before everything turned into rot. So everything was a little preemie, blah, blah, blah. We extract all of it, so it didn't make a difference. But inside, it's total control. It's like a lab. You can control perfect temperature, your CO2 usage at the right times. You can control how many times a day you feed them, how quickly they dry out, what medium you're using. It's a lot easier to get your beneficial sprays on, your pest management. Obviously, it's just having total control over every little aspect. It makes for a higher quality flower. It makes it just kind of more predictable, I guess would be the way to really put it. The biggest variables outside, besides just weather, as far as freezing or anything, is we have trouble, even if it's just a little cold. Obviously, when you're flowering, you want to be able to push as much food into the plant as possible. That's what's going to push out your terpenes, your THC levels, and your yields, your weight. And outside, if it's a little cold in August, or if it's just rainy or it's wet, I can't feed. So it just kind of, inside, it's just you keep your temperature perfect, you keep everything perfect, and you're feeding 2, 3, 4 times a day, whatever you want to do, and you just get everything dialed in and perfect. So it just makes a better flower and everything more consistent.
Yeah, I think the predictable standpoint is a unique aspect, and it's not one I think is commonly understood. So, Kellan, when you go to a dispensary and you're going to select a flower, do you ask whether it's indoor or outdoor?
So I'm in Colorado, and the majority, it's a lot colder in Colorado, right? It snows, there's mountains and stuff, right? And so the dispensaries in Colorado tend to only have indoor flower, right? So I think Hans mentioned about 2 years ago when they had the frost or whatnot, and they were a lot of their outdoor material just gets turned into oil. And I think that's the same way in Colorado. I know there's one really large farm down kind of by the Pueblo area in Colorado, but they've actually been decimated the last 2 years because of early snow, right? So the majority of cannabis in Colorado is indoor cannabis, and that would be the majority of cannabis you see on the shelves. And I honestly think that that is the case across the country. Would you agree, Hans, that most retail cannabis that you're buying these days in the dispensary is indoor cannabis?
Yeah, definitely. In Washington, for sure, people kind of have a stigma where they only want to buy indoors anyway. And it's somewhat unfair because you can grow really good weed outside. It's just, but I get it. But in California, it seems a little bit different. They don't seem to care where it was grown. And obviously, once you get into like central Southern California, Santa Barbara area and stuff, you can, that desert, as long as you have enough water, you don't worry about it so much like the early freeze or the temperature, so you can grow some really good weed out there. But definitely, for the most part, it is pretty much consensus that the best weed's going to be grown inside. So people definitely pay more for it. That's for sure. So that the only place I've ever really seen a lot of outdoor greenhouse weed in flower form on the shelf is probably, Central Southern California.
What about Florida?
Florida's going to be all indoor. At least for now, it's too humid. I've never grown in the swamp. So I'd have to try it before I could really, 100% say like what would happen. But from everything, like the knowledge I have and everything, it would probably, I just think it'd be a disaster. It'd be so humid and so hot. The buds would probably just rot on you, come August. So, I think 95 to 100% everything down there is just going to be either indoor or completely temperature, humidity controlled greenhouses.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense, especially as brands want to create a predictable, repeatable product, especially across state lines. They're going to need to have a consistency. And the best way to have a consistent product is to control all your variables. So I think that makes a ton of sense.
I think like Arizona, Nevada, you could probably grow like really well outside. The problem they have is water. So it's inside, same thing. You can there's all kinds of things you can do. You can collect water from your dehumidifiers and fill up your tanks and stuff like that. You can recycle it, all that stuff. When you're growing outside, you can't. So I'll use on our farms up here, I'll use 8 million gallons in a summer. So it's like, if you can't have access to that water, you just can't do it. So there's that variable too. But I do think if you put an outdoor farm in somewhere where it's just nice and hot in Nevada or Arizona, as long as the solar path is right, you could probably grow some of the best weed on the planet, in my opinion. I'm skewed because I like outdoor weed, but anyway.
Can you tell if you grab if we put 3 different flowers in front of you, could you tell which one was outdoor, which one would be indoor?
Ooh, that depends. It depends on how good your outdoor growers were. It's if you got a really good outdoor grower and they have a good season, I'd be able to tell it wasn't indoors, I think, but I would probably say it was greenhouse. I've shown some of our weed to people and they're like, "Oh, that's indoors," and I say, "No, it's outdoors," and then they argue with me, and I'm like, "I literally grew it," but okay. But it can, and it also depends. I've seen people's indoor weed that I say, "Oh, that's outdoor." Like, did it mold? So it just that is a question for the grower. More of a less specific answer, probably 90% of the time, yes. I'd be able to at least tell whether it was greenhouse, outdoor, or indoor. Indoor usually has a pretty distinct look to it. But again, it kind of depends on if it was all equally quality grown, then you'd be able to have a pretty good idea for the most part. Yeah.
That would be an exciting Netflix reality show.
I know, right? Some weed sommeliers.
So with growers, do you have a specific kind of style, or like for certain chefs, for example, they want to cook a certain way? For you growing the cannabis, do you kind of lean in certain directions, or do you have a preferred style that kind of is more to you?
Yeah, obviously everybody, what we always used to say, there's more than one way to skin a cat, right? Kellan, you remember Jesse, that was his saying. Mainly it just kind of comes with little stuff like topping a plant, or some people don't like to top different genetics. And personally, I have one way across the board. We do everything, just because as you start to scale, it becomes less boutique-y, and you kind of just have to be able to train people to do it in a quick and cost-effective way that also produces the best yields, quality, and lowest cost, right? So we have a specifically we prune, for instance, that I was in a fight with, not a fist fight, but like a yelling match with some guys in California about they didn't like the way I prune, and they prune a different way. I don't like the way they prune, so it all just kind of depends on the way you do it. I will say the way they're doing it's wrong, and their yields reflected it, but that's a different story. We do what we call lollipopping, where we take everything off the plant about week 1 of flower up until the top 2 or 3 little nodes of growth. So the thing looks naked. People look at it and they freak out, and that's wrong. You can't do it. But we do it simply because I only have time to go through and do it once. So we do it once, and that's that. And then the plant grows out of it, and it focuses all the growth to the top, so you get those big colas instead of having a bunch of larvae stuff underneath in the bottom. So that's one thing. Other than that, feeding is pretty straightforward. Certain people have different just like feeding lines that they want to use, heavy 16 or general hydroponics or stuff like that. I work with a nutrient company, and we kind of develop it as we go. You know, it really, I don't, it's tough to answer whether or not there's like just a full style, you know what I mean? But there's just definitely little tweaks and quirks that everybody kind of does differently.
What about salt
outdoor? Sure, there's that. Again, basically mediums. So if you're going inside, certain people like to use rock wool, like to use cocoa. Some people like to use soil. Some people like to grow organically. So outside, you can go into the ground. You can go into a pot. We have both out here. If I was going to grow organically, personally, I would have to do like top dressing, just dry amendments. Whereas inside, if you want to grow organically, you can use a liquid organic nutrient. So I don't know. I mean, how can I specify it more? I guess would be the question. The organic versus salts is pretty much as simple as this. Organically, the plant, you feed the soil, right? So you feed the soil, you get all the bacteria and the fungus propagating. It eats the nutrients, does its thing. The plant takes up the waste. That's kind of like the easiest way to put it. With the salt, you're essentially just feeding the plant directly. So you can, kind of like the indoor outdoor thing, I can really pinpoint if I'm feeding with a salt what I want to give it at a certain time. And as long as the problem with salts is you can burn them if you give them too much. So that really just comes down to I guess a preference. I personally would prefer to grow organically, but it's just a little harder to do it to scale. But it does put out better taste and stuff like that. Whereas I think you can get higher THC contents if you grow salts. So does that answer your question, or am I just rambling?
No, that answers my question. And I guess to take it one step further, these characteristics that you're describing, the end consumer obviously is not going to be able to know all of these intricate things, but how do they make these selection differences? Obviously, you're talking about how one aspect can influence the plant one way and one the other. So if they go into a dispensary, are the bud tenders going to know this? Can a consumer ask the bud tenders? Do you have any ideas about how that would work?
In my experience with bud tenders, no. They don't know much more than, what's up, brah? Like, here's to check this weed out. But if, I suppose if, you did like a really, hardcore, it'd be, maybe one day it'll be like when you go into a fancy restaurant and they have the sommelier come out and tell you about where the grapes came from and how they grew them. Right now, I've never experienced that in cannabis. It's just kind of a kid behind the register telling you what he likes, but they'll tell you whether or not it's organic. But then again, can you really prove whether or not that we can't do any federal, like OMRI listed or anything? They won't do any of that for cannabis because it's not federally legal. So pretty much I could just say it's organic if I wanted to, and like, you can come prove it, So that's kind of, I don't think the industry is really there yet, to be honest with you.
No, it's definitely not there yet, especially as us on the East Coast can't even do those things. But maybe in the future, the world will be different. So my next question for you is, where did you learn to grow cannabis? Obviously, this is a hobby that some of us have practiced in closets growing up and maybe in college. But where did you kind of really learn the skill?
When I moved out to Humboldt, I was lucky enough to have some college buddies who we all grew in our closets together, but who were out there doing it on a larger scale. And they invited me to come out. 8 or 9 years ago, like I said. And it was all with the intentions of coming up here once I went recreational. But I started with a guy down there who'd been growing for God knows how long. 30, 35 years. And he basically showed me on a real small scale how to grow organically, how to grow with salts. And then we scaled it up to a nursery where I was just kind of in charge of cutting thousands of clones and caring for them and everything. And then we had a, smaller, like 50 light room, and then added it to this and added to that. And then took care of some greenhouses. And then that's when I met Jesse, who came up to Washington with us, who he had operated several like large farms. And I was able to take knowledge I learned on the small scale and then mix it with what he taught me on how to really scale it. And that was kind of where it all just sort of clicked in together. And that's where the methods were different. The guy I learned from on the small scale did things way differently than Jesse did on the large scale. that's where like the pruning techniques and everything came in. So, and it was the only way we were really able to really keep it getting bigger and bigger. I think it's where a lot of people kind of hit their wall. Like you do a 30, 50, 100 light room and, you know, you think you're the best, but then quadruple that and you have to kind of adjust. So I was pretty fortunate to have, I guess, be put in touch with people who really knew all aspects of it, that I was able to learn it and take it to the scale that we're at.
Let's talk about Anchor. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. That's right. No more excuses. Get your lazy ass off the couch. Go start a podcast. There's the creation tool that allows you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Once again, no more excuses. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. Couldn't be easier. Even better, you can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. That's right. They're paying us for this ad. Thank you very much, Anchor. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started now.
Awesome. So this is obviously a very popular subject amongst our listeners. And for the listener question, there was obviously no doubt about which one this one was going to be. So Hans, what's the number one mistake you see home growers make? And what is the easiest way to get started growing at home?
Well, one, stay off the internet. Everybody wants to go and research everything off the internet, and most of it's just kind of crap. Get yourself a book and by one of the old school guys and kind of just follow them step by step. And that'd be my advice. That's how we always did it when we were doing our little closet grows. But the biggest mistakes would kind of, honestly, it's tough. One of the biggest mistakes I always see people making on any sort of scale, if you're not used to plants, is just overwatering. And it sounds silly, but it's when the plant's a baby, it's really hard to let it. Everybody thinks plants like water, right? So that my plant looks sad or it looks yellow or it looks this, so I'm going to hit it with some water. I'm going to hit it with some food. And you overdo it. And that they can never recover from it. So it's just one of those things. Patience is kind of a virtue with it. You gotta, once you plant, you just gotta leave it alone. You gotta know when it actually needs it. You only want to give the plant what it needs when it needs it. If you overdo it, you will kill it. It's kind of like force feeding your dog or something. That'll just die. So that's like the number one mistake and the hardest thing that I have teaching people with a soil grow. Obviously, when you get into the more technical stuff, they have moisture meters and computers that can do all that stuff for you. But for a little small home grow, that is number one. Just be patient. Make sure the plant needs to be watered, needs to be fed before you give it to it. And then on from there.
I just want to take a quick moment for all the plants that I've killed, overwatering them. Just thinking about that is very helpful. And I feel terrible knowing that I was the reason they didn't make it. But I mean, if you don't go on the internet and you want to learn kind of some of these tactics, you teaching any classes, Hans? Any ideas in the future? Maybe kind of one of those step-by-step, come learn how to grow cannabis at home?
I mean, I would be open to it. Nothing in the plans. I don't have a whole lot of free time. I'd be. I'm always happy to help if someone asks. Like I said, the first thing I did when we were growing in our closet, and even when we got out to California, was you read the old books by Jorge Cervantes and those guys. I disagree with a lot of the crap that they say, but they will give you the basic pointers on how to do everything, and at least kind of hammer down the basics. So it's like that's just the problem with online. You get on your forums and you will read so much crap that's just wrong, and you don't know who you're getting it from. You know what I mean? That's the only reason I tell everyone that I train or teach or anything. I'm like, if you have a question, call me. Do not get online. We get online last if we really can't figure out what's going on. It's just, there's just too much, call it misinformation. That's the popular word now, right? So it's, I don't know. You guys want to put on a class? I'll teach it for you. How's that sound?
Oh, well, we'll see. I mean, be careful what you say. This is a recorded podcast because we're going to drop that line really quickly and see how many people we can get to sign up. But it might be a popular class, but who knows?
I'll happily. We do like the master class or something.
Exactly.
I'd I have no problem doing that at all. I don't know how we do it because it's like, it takes 6 months for the plant to go from seed or clone to finished, but I'm sure we can figure something out. I'd be happy to
have a weekly clubhouse meetup, Hans.
There you go. Yeah, I got the clubhouse. Let's do it.
Hans,
again,
what's your favorite? We'll take care of all of it. What's your favorite strain? Like, what's your go-to if you're looking for some flower? And is flower your first choice?
Like, you're talking smoking or growing it?
Yeah, smoking it.
Smoking it. Yeah, if I pretty much, I'm like a 70s smoker. I like to just smoke a joint here and there. I honestly don't smoke that much. Kellan can attest to that. I think once you surround yourself with nothing but weed all the time, I don't want anything to do with it. But I don't really have a favorite like strain per se. I just like I like the lighter stuff. I like the older school stuff. You like train wrecks, stuff like that. Just stuff that's kind of just you get a little high, but a little energetic, so that I can go for a hike or something like that. I'm not a big fan of like the couch lock, OG strains or cookie strains, stuff like that. They just kind of I don't move. I don't really like that anymore. I used to, but that would be. We got a strain here that our buddy bred called Black Afghani Rose. That's probably one of my favorites of all time. It's just it's real light and just kind of uplifting, and I can work on it if I want to. That's probably one of my favorites. I know, I love it. Yeah, unfortunately, you can't really buy it anywhere. I don't think anybody has it anymore. But yeah, that's one of my favorites there.
Hans, what's your favorite strain, or I guess what strain would you say does best indoor, outdoor, and in light depth?
Well, okay, in my experience up here in Washington, at least, the indoor would probably be either that one, the BAR, or we have another strain named Wonder Woman that just throws out just basically football-sized nugs. It tests in like the mid to high 20s, finishes in 8 weeks, and it's just, kind of like what you're looking for. That one, so the depth houses are pretty similar to outdoor or to indoor as far as yields and everything. That one was still probably the best I've ever grown in a depth house. It actually got almost double the yield as any of the other things, but OGs are real good for that too. Even the old Gorilla Glues, stuff like that. They throw out pretty heavy yields. They just take a little longer. They go 9.5 weeks or so they get kind of rough. If you're trying to do a 2-depth system or anything. And outdoor. So the thing about the outdoor is it really is like a fruit or something. I have strains up here that I grow that just absolutely crush it for me, that I have buddies in Cali that grow it and it does terribly, and vice versa. So my personal favorite up here is it's a 9-pound hammer. It's basically a cross. A buddy of mine, same thing, same guy bred the BAR. He bred it, calls it 9-pound hammer number 6. Callan, I know you know that one. It's still the best one we have by far. We grew 95 strains last year, and nothing's even really close. It just does perfect. Just big 15-foot tall plants, test high. I think the last testing we did was 23% THC, and that's for outdoors, so it's pretty damn good. And you're getting 5-6 pounds of trim weed a plant. It's just finishes October 15th. Just like right in the perfect little meaty part of the harvest. So I don't think there's anyone I will even compare to it, to be honest with you.
Yeah, the names is a whole nother. The names is a whole nother game, and we could talk about that for days. Like, how does one even come up with those names? Just kind of combining the two different strains and then just making a change. It's just that aspect kind of just blows my mind.
I am honestly bad with the strains. I know all like the old school ones. I just get stuff. I don't even know where they come from half the time anymore. I used to have all my logs of the crosses, the genetics, everything. And I just kind of, it's when we're working down in California, it's insane. I mean, there's stuff I've never heard of. It's, and they're by far the best, most popular strain. Then you go down 3 months later and they're like, oh yeah, that's old news. Like there's, Gary Payton and Cereal Milk and like all these other ones that they're growing and the big famous brands are putting out. And honestly, I couldn't keep up. There's just too many. So yeah, I think some of them are just like that. They're just somebody who said, oh, I think it'd be cool to name a strain Tom Sawyer. And then the other ones are, like you said, it's usually just like a cross back between, whatever, 2 different strains, Chem OG or something like that, and they just keep it simple and call it that. That's the easy way to go, right?
So let's do prediction time kind of right around that topic. Cannabis is federally legal. We're all very excited. Things are good for us. you go into a dispensary and you want to pick up flower. Are you buying it based on, is it going to be the brand of the strain? Like how do you think in the future they'll have nationality brands with products? How do you think that'll work, Hans?
Personally, I think it'll work out like everything else, and it might take a long time because especially with it going state by state and there being lots of different brands. But yeah, in 50, 60 years, you're going to have your Pepsi and your Coke and all type of stuff. And I'm going to be the curmudgeon old man telling my nieces and nephews how the weed we used to smoke was so much better. But that's just, that's my pessimist side. I do think that there's always going to be, you know, like I think it'll be a lot like wine too, where you have your, or microbrews, even like, you know, now microbrews have become super popular and there's just kind of region by region. Some make it nationally. I think that'll be a big thing. I think it'll be, I do think that there'll be your Coors Light and your Miller Light and Coke, whatever, stuff like that for sure. But I hope that it's more of a boutique market, but it doesn't seem to work like that with much anything, does it?
Kellan, your thoughts?
I agree with Hans. You know, I think that the beer industry is probably a really good model that you could look at to kind of predict the cannabis space, right? And I know like in Humboldt, when I was there, I went to a town meeting and they had originally started the conversation about appellations, kind of how the grape and wine industry is. And so there'll be pockets of that aspect, right? From a wine connoisseur kind of product standpoint and comparative to the microbrew with your fancy hazy IPAs and your other beers that they come out with. But at the end of the day, I think the majority of consumer access is going to be dictated by a couple really large players, and those really large players are just going to push their brands and own the retail space, and it'll be the majority of what you see will be like the Miller Lite and the Coors Light or Pepsi and Coke, however you want to kind of make that comparison. What do you think, Bryan?
I don't really know, actually, because is Curaleaf going to own a certain strain? And then when you start bringing the location like you did into it, which might make it extremely attractive for some of the OGs to want certain types of bud, I don't really know how that's going to work. I guess it'll be brand recognition. I think that's king in all the industries. And when people see a brand that they trust or that they know, they feel a sense of loyalty and a sense of trust towards it. And I think as we get closer to brand nationalities and federal legalization, I think that'll be a really popular thing. Can I walk into a dispensary in California, get a specific type of product, and then come back into New York and buy the same product and have the same type of effect? We're probably a long ways away from that, but I wonder how they'll break it up and how that purchasing experience will really be.
Yeah, it could go like kind of regional too. Like I know the microbrew example, you know, in the Northwest, it's everything. You know, you can just go to the grocery store and there's 150 different IPAs and Pilsners and everything and there's one little section with Miller Lite, Coors Light, Bud Light, and an entire wall of microbrews. So they're just way more into them out here. Whereas where I'm from, Chicago, it's the exact opposite. There's like, at least used to be anyway, maybe it's changed, but you've got all of your old style Miller Lite, all that stuff. And then there'd be like one little section with some microbrews. So it could be maybe in California, they don't give a damn about Curaleaf or something like that, but they care about, you know, some little brand that grows boutique-y organic weed up in the mountains. You know, could end up being something like that. I don't know. I honestly hope that there's a emphasis on quality and it stays the way it is. But yeah, when the big guys get involved, they just throw so much money at it, and their goal isn't to grow anything high end. They don't care. It's just money to them. So it's just kind of pump it out fast and keep your costs down. And usually when they just keep throwing that at people for long enough, it tends to work, right?
Sure. And it's funny that you say that, because I had that same experience out in Portland. I was like, this is the most small breweries I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, where's the normal beers? I just want to grab like a 30 rack. But I wonder, as we continue to evolve and Jay-Z selling like the $50 grams, right? I think consumers are going to kind of crave that specific grower. And I wonder if they become kind of like the chefs are today, where people kind of idolize Gordon Ramsay and some of these other chefs from an individual standpoint and kind of seek out their different restaurants, whether you're in New Orleans or in California or in New York. And I wonder, as the consumer kind of gets more educated, if they'll kind of seek out that same experience with master growers.
I think they will. Same thing, but keep in mind there's still Applebee's, So, so it's like I think there'll be a market for it, and it might be a bajillion-dollar market. I think the odds are good. Most of when you go to the weed store, like the biggest chunk of it'll be whatever, MedMen or Curaleaf or something like that, and it'll just be stamped on it. But I definitely think that there will be a large boutique market, at least for a long time. I mean, weed has been kind of the reverse, right? I mean, the black market has even dictated quality. It's when I was in college and you'd be buying weed, you didn't want to buy any Beasters or AAAs or any of that crap. You wanted some kind of fire that came from wherever. You'd pay $60 for it. And now a lot of the weed that's on the shelves in states like that, the reason the black market's thriving is you can get better weed on the black market than you can in the store. So I'm hoping that it's going to kind of balance out to the point where there's at least a healthy mix, and where the kind of Miller Lite craft weed is just your cheap weed, and then you've got your high end stuff and your Grey Goose or whatever over here that people go and spend more money for. That's just how it should be, right?
Absolutely. Then the follow-up question that we ask every single guest is, when was the last time you consumed any cannabinoids?
Last night before I went to bed, I smoked a joint. Nice.
Well, thanks for your time, Hans. And we look forward to selling out your first class of Growing with Hans.
Yeah, man. Let me know. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks,
I hope it was helpful.